Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Thank you Angelus Black for the recommendation. The manhwa starts off with someone explaining that 3 days have passed, since the phenomenon which brought him into the novel he wrote happened. We learn it's akin to possession, and it's something that would happen in the world of webtoons, and he didn't think he would experience that very possession himself. He's surprised to still be in his current body, and no matter how hard he rubs his eyes, he cannot get rid of a character information status screen. We learn his name is Larson Maiden, and he's really possessed a character in the novel, and it had to be a star-crossed supporting character. His brothers would kill him in 9 years. On the first day, we see him wake up yelling, and the maid begins to apologize profusely, and gets on her knees, saying she's committed a crime worthy of death. He wonders who she is, and says she doesn't look Korean or Western, and asks her where he is. She apologizes again, saying she didn't know he had to wake up, while bashing her head into the floor. This shocks him, and he asks if she's okay, and she is scared, and screams "Don't hit me." And we learn she passed out from him standing up. On the second day he learns his name isn't Cha Sung-min anymore, and that he met a boy named Hampton, who records his daily log, and when Larson asks him about it he apologizes and says he'll finish quickly. Larson watches him, and we learn that every movement of the successors of reputable families is closely monitored, and another person will record your daily activities, and it happens every day from onward of 14 years old. He is startled to see Larson, and spills ink all over the book, and he apologizes, saying he'll clean it up quickly. We see Larson kicking the boy in the face, because his body is reacting by itself, at least, that's what it feels like. After the second day, he started to recover his memories, and at 4 years old, he used a toy stick to beat up the servants that attend to him, and one of them was Hampton. At 5, he learned the truth about his birth, and that he was a child born from a maidservant. And while he was afraid of his father, he had no fear for his mother, so he treated her poorly, and he spit on her face. He did this at 7, and just overall, he has a horrible personality, and he would always do terrible things to the servants, one after another, just going on a rampage. And when he was 8, he beat up a little girl with a stick, and afterward, he went around bragging about it, because the girl Rosalind is 6 years old, and the only daughter of a reputable martial arts family, and because of this Larson's father had to bow his head to the Grandel family's head and apologize. And before Larson turned 9, he was banished to a remote mansion, and we see a few days ago, he threw a tantrum over some chocolate. And we learn again that Larson is a character in a novel that Cha Sung-min wrote. And while Larson was designed to be a rat, he wasn't created with this much detail, or memories, and this isn't a world that Cha Sung-min wrote about. It's a world he didn't, which means these are all things that occurred by themselves in this world. The third day we see him acknowledging the possession, and that it isn't a dream, but a reality, and that the Larson from his novel had no details about how he looked or his abilities, because he only appeared occasionally, and since it wasn't set on when he would appear he has a talent for martial arts, and it's a trait he wrote down, but never used. So from the reader's perspective, he never had talent, and he died at the age of 17. Larson decides to make surviving his top priority, and since he's 9, there are still 8 years to go until he's executed, so he can dream of a future for the next 8 years, but the problem is what comes after that. The true protagonist of the novel Kassan Shade is bound to fight against the Maiden family, because long ago, the Maiden's family had killed the first son of the swordsman family on accident, and it was a complicated scenario that is kept hidden for quite a while. But due to it being found out the two families went to war, and since the novel is named after the Shade family, they obviously won the war, and the Maiden family was pretty much destroyed. He wonders what to do, and when he should do it, and even though it was a poorly created world, he is still the creator, so all of the plot armor meetings that Kassan had were made by him, so he knows the future. He resolved himself to take advantage of these things, to live a better life than he had previously. And since he only gets to live the life once, it wouldn't be a bad idea to enjoy it. And because of the martial arts trait, even Larson didn't know how strong it was, and he's probably a genius because he possesses the blood of one of the 3 great families of this world. So he's been born with a golden spoon. So besides the fact, he's a rat, and only has 8 years to live, he just needs to do something about it. He notices the status window again, and we see it mentioning that he's activated the Heavenly Eye, and Larson is shocked because this was the ability of Kassan. It means the status window he's seeing is the Heavenly Eye, but wonders why he has it because he isn't the protagonist. He explains more about Kassan's ability, and how the novel is a Munchkin a min-maxer, fantasy novel, and that Casson is strong enough to destroy the entire planet, and even the universe, and the problem here is that he used that same power to destroy the Maidens. Larson looks down and notices a ring, and that it isn't something that can normally be seen, almost as if his body is being analyzed. He wonders if it's signifying the first circle, and he explains that circle refers to a ring that is created by gathering mana around the heart, and it is used as a fuel container when using magic. We learn that in the story he wrote, it requires a lot of effort and time to get even the first circle, and that a rat like Larson wouldn't train magic, and he doesn't remember him training either, so it appeared automatically. He hears a knock at the door, and he says it must be Hera, and she asks if she can enter. We see the maid kneeling, and it cuts to him telling her she should kneel when she sees him. Larson is annoyed by the rules he set previously. He is shocked when he sees her status window, and we see that Hera has a talent in assassination. He wonders why she has a talent in that, and he doesn't remember putting it in her character. He comments that the world in the novel is crazy, and it's not different from an uncivilized wilderness, so someone intentionally placed an assassin by his side, and they sent the assassin there even though it's a remote location, so it has to be someone fighting to be the successor. He realizes he could die, and has to tell himself to calm down, and he must smile even if it's forced, and she might kill him if she sees an opening. And he realizes that the fear she has of him, and her tears was all acting. He realizes her trembling is real, at least that's what the Heavenly Eye is telling him. He calls to her, and tells her to bring him some chocolates, and he wants her to get out so he can sort out his thoughts. We see her outside the room, wondering what happened, because the expression he gave off seemed different than before, and she noticed it a few days ago that the air around him feels different, something completely different. We see her float down the hallway like an Erdtree burial watchdog, and it cuts to Larson going through all the information he has. He mentions again he's been banished to this mansion, and his father has abandoned him and pushed him to the bottom of the successor ranks, and even if he has no chance of being a successor, he's still monitored, and that his family has a villain-type role in the story. But he decides to behave like a decent person to ensure his survival, and now he possesses the power of the protagonist, and knows the future, and where the artifact is located, so he must participate in the succession war, because if he doesn't, he'll be marked as trash. And here, he can live his life without worry, he can travel and enjoy being carefree, and just needs to maintain a middle position, so he doesn't overstep his boundary, or underperform, and he's done it before as a soldier. Now he has a clear idea of how to behave, his heavenly eye deactivates, and Hera opens the door saying she shouldn't find the chocolate, and he tells her it's okay. She begins to say she's committed a crime worthy of death again, but is interrupted, and Larson tells her to get lost. Since he needs to maintain the scoundrel image and mentions it's scary, she doesn't make a sound. He tells her to get lost again. Outside the door, we see her wondering if she heard him wrong, and that someone who usually goes crazy over chocolate says it was okay. So she'll observe him more before making a report. It cuts to 1 week later, we see Larson telling Hampton to get ready. And Hampton asks what for, and he tells him he's going to the training building. Hampton questions him, and Larson yells, asking if he needs to repeat himself. Larson thought about a lot this last week, and to survive, he needs to participate in the succession war, and he needs to train hard, and to survive and gain independence. So it's time to use that power. Hampton recognizes that he's changed, and that he used to beat him regularly for not assisting him properly, but now he wants to train. It cuts back to before, and we learn that Larson learned that Hampton is talented in poison, and Larson thinks it's because he's preparing himself against him. And that a well-trained aide is assigned to all successors as their assistant, and they would devote their life, and are called shadows. It cuts to the training building, and Hampton is happy that he's here to train, but wonders where the sudden change has come from, and it's not that he's afraid of him causing trouble, but his heart aches when he sees people despising Larson, and he decides to trust him. Larson is surprised to see the training facility as a modern building in a fantasy world, and says he did a half-assed job with the setting, but it makes him comfortable because it's what he's familiar with. There's an administrator living in each of the buildings, and we see Noah, the administrator of the Leaf building, introduce himself to Larson. He greets him back, and we learn that he slapped Noah a year ago for not bowing all the way to greet him, but is angry he doesn't remember him. Larson tries to look at Noah with his heavenly eye, but it doesn't work, and he mentions it must be because he's strong, and decides not to be cocky, but nice to him. Larson asks what kind of training he should start with, and to recommend a monster that's suitable for his age. Noah asks his age, and Larson tells him, and we learn Noah has a grudge against Larson, so to pay him back, he recommends for him to fight a mushroom monster. Larson remembers writing about it, and tells him it'll do. Noah says the prep will take a few minutes, and Larson wonders why Noah is so happy. Larson thinks the monster should be an easy monster if the sixth young master, who wasn't written about, could kill it. Larson focuses on the mana around his heart, and realizes that his talent is magic combat, and he's already grasped how to use magic. Noah tells him it's ready, and we see Larson inside a simulated mushroom forest. Noah closes the door to the room and wishes him luck. Larson sees the monster, and we see a tiny mushroom thing bouncing. He decides to get started, and begins to charge his fist with mana. A status window appears saying the will of his physical body has been confirmed, and the magic combat technique in his body has been activated, and he feels the magic circle moving. Noah says before he joined the maiden family, he was regarded as a genius, yet Larson humiliated him for not bowing far enough, and that today he'll pay him back for that, and the monster he's fighting is at the highest level, and that Larson's technique is considered a low level, so he can't damage it with a technique without any elemental attributes, and with this, he'll get his revenge. He is shocked to see Larson's fist glowing and him jumping at the monster. Larson punches a hole through it, shocking Noah. Larson is surprised it was so easy. Larson's status screen pops up again, updating him on his technique, and mentioning that the unpredictable things are becoming predictable. And he can feel the blood surging in his heart, and we see a technique called weight utilization being imprinted on his circle, which surprises him. Noah is confused by Larson's demonstration of a pure magic technique, and that it's a type that deals physical damage, but that the mushrooms have physical resistances, which confuses him. Noah says it doesn't look like the mushroom monster is good enough, and Larson agrees. Noah says he is thinking of increasing the difficulty, and Larson says he almost ran out of mana, and asks how much it'll increase by. Noah tells him it isn't a lot, but he'll need to kill it quickly before the monster spreads. Noah puts aside his grudge, and decides to get information for his report, and if he thinks it'll be dangerous, he'll stop the training. Larson comments he didn't write about the mushrooms in detail, and we see the monster appear, and besides the color, he wonders what the difference is. He narrowly dodges the abrupt attack from the monster, and watches as it flies back at him, but he blocks it. He comments on its speed, and says it isn't intimidating. And we see it launch at him again, but he blocks it, and Noah is surprised. Larson comments that it's a simple pattern, so he'll use his ability, and he grabs it, and imbues his hand with mana, but realizes he doesn't have enough. But he hits it anyways, and comments that it felt like time had slowed down, and we see his heavenly eye deactivates, and he decides to analyze what happened once he accumulates more mana. Hampton is surprised by what he witnessed, and wonders if Larson has trained himself. Noah asks if he's undergone his 10th year ceremony and wonders why he's so strong even though he hasn't gone through it yet. Hampton is surprised that Larson has a mana circle, and is brought to tears thinking he's been training secretly, and hugs him. Larson realizes he's created a commotion, and decides he needs to act low, so he fake passes out. Noah tells Larson to go get a healing mage. We see Hampton waking up a healer, and he is surprised to hear that the 7th son is here, and not the 6th. It cuts to the healer looking at Larson, commenting that if he's injured from a side effect of his technique, it'll be hard to heal him, and decides to pretend to heal him, then pass him to a higher ranked mage. The man casts a healing spell, and as expected, there wasn't a reaction, because it wouldn't work in the first place, and decides to half-ass it. But we see Larson open his eyes, and the mage is shocked and wonders if his healing ability has improved. Larson thanks him, and everyone is shocked to hear him say it. It cuts to Hera out of breath, and she's brought chocolates for Larson, and apologizes that there's only 2, and he tells her it's okay to just leave those and go. While thinking that he doesn't want to torture her anymore. He tells her he's tired from training, so leave. She leaves, and it cuts to Hampton telling her that Larson went to train, and she is shocked. It goes back to Larson eating chocolate, and he says he normally doesn't like them, but this chocolate comforts him. But he realizes something and activates the heavenly eye to notice that the chocolate is spreading throughout his body, and we learn it gives him mana. This is why he has so much mana. He feels like the character is gaining depth, and that it must be from the predictability being reorganized, and is still surprised by eating chocolate to gain mana. Because normally, mages look for places that are filled with mana, and suffer to absorb mana, and it seems like Larson has a unique constitution he didn't write about, which is why it was unpredictable before. And the side effect of free mana appears to be weight gain, and he wonders what the flow slowly talent he gained previously is. Hira knocks on the door, and we see Larsen's other brother arrives, and he is extremely rude to Larsen. We learn that Larsen was scared of his brother Carlin, and Larsen greets him. Carlin asks what he's doing, which confuses Larsen, then he tells him he should be crawling like a bug into Neil. But Larsen's flow slowly, talent activates, and he can see the swing in slow motion, and he decides to find out how strong the talent is. He deflects the swing, knocking the weapon out of Carlin's hands, and this angers him. He wonders what Larsen is doing, and yells at him, telling him he'll kill him. He activates some mana, and we see water form around his fist as he tells Larsen to die. Larsen notices some water on the sides of his face and his abdomen, and realizes it'll be troublesome if their formation finishes, so Larsen breaks them and quickly gets behind him, and then appears back in front of him to deliver a blow to the stomach. His brother begins to cough up blood, and he yells for Hampton to get a healing mage. And he wonders if it's because he attacked him before his magic manifested. Hampton runs into the room, asking about the situation, and Larsen tells him to get a mage again, and he runs off. Larsen recognizes he overdid it, but learned the most effective way to deal with a mage from it. The next day we see Hira and Hampton talking, and she's shocked that Larsen beat Carlin, and Hampton goes to tell her he's actually a shadow, and she tells him she knows, and that everyone other than Larsen actually knows. He tells her she's too silent to be a normal maidservant, and she says the same thing about everyone knowing. And he asks if she still thinks he's a scoundrel, and she tells him to keep talking. He explains that he thinks that Larsen is serious because of the ceremony approaching, and it cuts to Larsen outside of the library, and he is shocked by the size, and is more surprised that Larsen's never visited it before. He sees a countless number of books, and he says he wonders how many books there are. A voice tells him about 200,000, and he wonders where the voice is coming from. He sees a rainbow aura and a woman appear from it. He asks who she is, and she says she's the librarian Evian. It cuts back to Hira and Hampton's conversation, and she asks if what he thinks makes any sense. And Hampton says, what if Larsen's been hiding his ability this entire time? And he tells her he's seen it himself, and he's finished the first circle, and asks if it can happen overnight. And to think about how his name hasn't been brought up at all because of his behavior. And imagine how convenient it is only Hira is monitoring him, and that's why he's intentionally kept a low profile. She says it doesn't make sense, and isn't his talent just limited to combat techniques? Hampton says so, and he's sure of everything he's said so far, because he is his shadow, and that he's shown him there's a future, and that they are bound to be abandoned here if he dies anyways. So instead of allowing that to happen, they should work together. Hira says if he goes to the library, she'll consider it, and maiden members competing for the succession war need to study at the library and devise a strategy. It then cuts back to Evian introducing herself, and Larsen cannot remember who she is, and uses Heavenly Eye to see her real name is actually Larvian, which he recognizes. She says it's an honor to meet him, and we learn while she didn't fight against Cassin directly, she's one of the highest ranking mages, and she slaughtered a lord and his knights, turning them into icicles, even freezing their entire castle. And what she does in the future is basically a disaster, and he's surprised that she's here even though she's a wanted person. And he wonders why the librarian had to be her, and why she's just staring at him. She tells him to sit down, and she'll give him tea, and offers him black tea. He says he likes it, even though he doesn't, and she disappears. And he's glad this is his first time here, because there's no telling what the original Larsen would have done. She asks what he's there for, and he tells her a book on mana cultivation. She asks what kind, and he tells her the most basic of books. She thinks it's redundant, and he pretty much tells her rather be safe than sorry, and the phrase confuses her. She finds a book for him, and we see her use magic to give it to him, and he tells her she can leave now. She leaves, and we see him reading the book on mana, and we learn that mana describes all types of energy that are distributed into nature, and to be a mage, you must form a ring first, and you would need to know the equations for that, and he explains some quantum physics type shit, and is lost because this is meant to be the most basic book. And that the information is just too weird, but he realizes if he can't do it and he activates his Heavenly Eye to see the completion is at 5%, and that his ability is monstrous for analyzing words, he doesn't understand. And another problem is that Cassin also has the ability, and he uses it much better than Larsen does. We see the percentage go up, and he wonders if he'll completely understand it at 100%, and now he just needs to resolve his mana problem, and decides to stop there for the day. It cuts back to the mansion, and Hampton informs him that Lady Soso is here, and Larson sees her and wonders why his mother appeared at a time like this. He mentions that in his past life, he always missed his mom, because he couldn't see her, and he watched her die in the hospital. And he suffered a lot from this emotionally. But he's surprised to see that she looks so similar to his mother, and he notices she has an illness known as the blue dot. We see him having tea with his mother, and remembering what the past Larson did to her. He calls out to her and says he doesn't know where to start. We see Hira watching, wondering if he really was putting on an act previously or not, and then we see Larson apologizing to his mother. She is shocked, and he tells her he doesn't know if she'll believe him, but he's come to his senses, and her voice cracks while saying, "Is that so?" Larson's mother only listened to him apologizing, and gave simple answers, and her voice made it clear why she only gave short answers. She tells him she'll be back later, and that she has work to do. Larson knows she doesn't actually have work to do, because she's not a maidservant anymore. He explains more about the blue dot illness, and it's a disease where 3 blue dots appear, and nobody knows why, or how to treat it, and once there are 3 dots, it's incurable, but currently, it's only at 1. We see his mother crying behind the door, and she wonders why she keeps crying because it's a good day. Her own son has finally called her mother. Larson calls out to her, asking if it's alright with her, if she could spend an hour every day with him. He tells her they will drink tea together, and she agrees. He explains that the tea has the potential to cure the blue dot disease, and she's still his mother, and she's never given up on him, and he wishes for her to stay healthy. It cuts to night, and we see his mother wondering if this is all a dream, that he's changed into a different person. She calls out to someone asking if they are listening, and tells them about what happened today, and we see a candle flicker. The next day we see Larson telling Hira that he's going to tell her something important, and she wonders if he found out who she is, and wonders if he's going to ask her to assassinate someone. He tells her he wants more chocolate, but only the special kind. She wonders why she was expecting anything, and he says he has one more thing to tell her. And she thinks it's the important thing, but he just asks for more sweets, which disappoints her. An hour later, we see Larson looking at a mountain of diabetes, and he begins to succumb to the urges of the sweet tooth and devours the chocolate. He comments on the different prices, and how they give different amounts of mana based on the quality. And that it's also possible to gain mana from the other bakery he told Hira about. And that's because they share a common ingredient. He calls out to Hampton, and tells him to get him the baker, and 30 minutes later, we see the man standing before him. He wonders why he's been called for, and is scared because of the rumors surrounding Larson, and afraid he might kill him. He hopes everything is alright, and Larson asks what he put into the sweets, and to tell him every ingredient. The baker begins to apologize, and Larson tells him he hasn't made a mistake. He just wants the recipe. The baker tells him the recipe, and he recognizes the ingredient between the both of them, which is the 1,000-year herb, and he realizes that's how he can gain more mana. It cuts to the training hall, and Noah is informed by the healer that Larson beat up Carlin, and Noah thinks he's a lunatic. Noah wonders when he got so powerful, and the mage asks if he thinks Larson did it because of the upcoming ceremony, and that Larson beat the hell out of his brother, and wasn't aware he had that much skill. Noah tells him even if he grows fast due to his combat technique, there's a limit, and not only will he be unable to surpass the Grandels, but he'll have issues incorporating elemental spells, and everyone has turned their back on that kind of study. It cuts back to Larson eating the 1,000-year herb, and he mentions how he can eat these and not gain calories, unlike the chocolate, which gave him pudge, but now he can burn the fat with his core. And by increasing his mana and using Heavenly Eye, he can grow quickly. 3 days later, we see he's finally processed the magical book he was reading, and he gets a notification that a secret page from the Great Sage has appeared. He sees that the Great Sage left his mana cultivation technique, and he wonders who that is, but to learn more, he needs to go to the library, but he's scared of Evian, and prefers to keep his distance, but he has no choice. We see Hira on the ceiling above him, observing him. It cuts to the library, and as he wonders where Evian is, she jump scares him, and he hands her back the book he borrowed. She quickly throws the book storing it back, and she asks if he's looking for something else. And he asks about the Great Sage Alberto's book. She tells him it's in the library. And he asks her to give it to him, and she says the book is impossible to understand, and he tells her he just wants to look at it for fun. She begins sniffing him, and he compares the feeling to a predator smelling their prey. And she tells him he smells good, and he pulls out the chocolate bar asking if it's what she smelt, and asks if she wants some. She says no while quickly grabbing the chocolate and says if he's going to force her, then she might as well take it. He's surprised by how she's acting, and wonders why she's acting this way. As he's leaving, he wonders how she'll react to a compliment, so he tells her if she wants more chocolate to come to the mansion, and he'll let Hira know about her. He wonders if she'll come, and thinks to himself he hopes she doesn't. We see him staring at the book, and the status screen displays that he's 42% of the way to understanding the book, but it's not as exciting as he thought it would be, and wishes the book wasn't filled with weird claims made by the great sage. It then cuts to outside, and we see Hira and Hampton watching Larson running, and commenting on his recent changes. Hira says it's not a normal workout, and when Hampton asks what it is, we see Evian appear behind them, explaining that he's melting mana by working out. They are shocked by her sudden appearance, and Hampton asks if he should tell Larson she's there, and she says he doesn't have to, and he wonders why she's there, and he understands she's a high-ranking magician, and that the librarians are meant to remain neutral to the succession war. Evian says the rumors are different compared to real life. Hira tells Evian she was meant to give her chocolate if she stopped by. And she never thought she would like chocolate. Hira thinks that Evian must be furious to be receiving it as a gift, and Evian quickly takes it, and goes back to observing. Hira wonders why Larson gave her chocolate, and wonders what happened between the two. It then cuts to 3 days later, and he's finished analyzing the book and how it's absorbing the contents. He's glad it's over, but is overcome by a feeling that brings him to his knees. He feels as if his heart is going to explode. He realizes if he doesn't properly read the flow, his heart will explode, and that he needs to read it with the heavenly eye, and is shocked to learn that you could die just from misinterpreting a book, and he begins to focus. We see later on in the day he's finally engraved the teaching from the book, and due to the influence of it, he's now able to see the backstory he couldn't previously see. He begins to see the backstory of the world, and now he'll be able to learn more about the unpredictability, and the strange feeling from Evian, and it's revealed she loves chocolate. He recalls a moment when he was watching a friend's son, and he scribbled into his backstory notebook, but now he understands why Evian's behavior was strange. He hears a voice saying it's useless for someone like him to concentrate, and he is alarmed to see he's surrounded by fire, but he realizes it isn't hot and sees a figure. She calls out, asking if he has a death wish, and we're introduced to his sister Persia, and we learn she has 3 attributes, and he wonders why she's here. And she asks if she should cut him up, and we learn she hates weak people, and has a hobby of cutting people up. She gets annoyed that he isn't responding, and he goes to apologize, but realizes it's a bad idea, and understands this must be a test she's given unintentionally. He tells her he wasn't pretending to concentrate, and realizing it's his only shot, continues with what he was saying, and she tells him to continue. He explains he was truly concentrating, and that he knows she's saying this to see if he would lie or apologize, and she begins to laugh. She comments on how the rumors of him changing were true, and he tells her he's trying to live as a decent person from now on. She says it's a little too late for that, and summons a fire snake at him, saying once he thinks it's too late, it really is too late. The snake coils around him, and he tells her he knows he cannot be patriarch, because he knows what he's capable of, but he can help someone else become the patriarch. She tells him to keep talking, and he says he'll become an unexpected variable, and she wonders if he'll even be useful. He tells her that will depend on the person who decides to use him, and she asks who he wants to support, and he tells her he doesn't know who will become the family head, but he knows his sister Ivelia is often talks about, and he tells Persia he knows she's scared of her. Her fire snake begins to hiss at Larson, and the fire begins to increase in heat, and he says it feels like he's going to be burned alive. She tells him she let him speak because she thought he was cute, but now he's talking nonsense. Larson tells her he knows she hates lies, and he'd rather speak an offensive truth than act weak, and he may submit to honor, but he will not submit to power. We see the flames vanish, and he tells her since he spoke the truth, he hopes she'll forgive him. She pulls out a ball while calling him an idiot, and hits him in the stomach with it. He looks down to see that it was an apple. We also see that because of her hitting him, he gained a new magic combat technique. She tells him to eat it, and that she found it on the floor on the way here. He inspects the apple and sees that it's actually a Karshan, which is a mana elixir. Larson comments that because he's the maiden's youngest, this is possible, and that Kassan is probably also being flooded with gifts, but he wouldn't have space for a Karshan, which makes him better in this regard. It cuts back to Persia commenting on how the scoundrel actually made a first circle from self-study, and if he truly acted like a scoundrel so far, then he's very sly. And that she needs sly people for her war, and she compliments how he is fearless, but says it's obvious where his limits will reach. So he has no chance of becoming the patriarch. She calls for her shadow Sando, and tells her to continue spreading bad rumors about her brother, and to stop him from meeting their other siblings. While she wonders if he ate the Karshan, she tells Sando to watch over him so he doesn't die from eating it, and it would be troublesome if people found out that she killed him, and if he doesn't eat it, then it'll become interesting. And if he's dumb enough not to eat what she's offered him, then it'll be okay for her to cut off his limbs. We see Larson analyzing the Karshan, and it warns him he'll die if he overconsumes it, and he needs the help of a mage, preferably one that can use water, ice, and wind. He wonders why she gave it to him, and wonders if she wants him to be indebted, but then realizes she probably only did it out of curiosity. And if he absorbs the Karshan properly, she'll probably make use of him, but he doesn't know if she'll keep him by her side or throw him away. But if he doesn't eat it, she'll definitely cut off one of his limbs, and he realizes he needs an ice mage's help now. He thinks of Evian, but says she'll probably kill him instead, and people will think he just died, and she'll be able to take the Karshan. This is just what he thinks is the worst case. We see Evian walk to his door, and he realizes he cannot just hide it because she's probably already detected the Karshan's mana, so he calls her in. He tells her he's sure she's detected it, and he's called her over because he didn't want to hide it, and asks if she wants to make a deal. He tells her he cannot consume it by himself, and needs her help. She reminds him that she is a librarian, so she must remain neutral and cannot aid him in the succession war. He tells her he's not asking for help with that, and he just wants to commit himself to magic and further his prowess as a mage. She comments that he sounds like a model mage, and someone has been spreading bad rumors about him. He tells her he has no intention of joining the succession war, and she replies by saying the maiden family children would spend their whole lives trying to become patriarch. He tells her it has nothing to do with that, and he just wishes to become stronger. She says, regardless of that, as the librarian, I am unable to get involved, so ask a maiden mage for help. He tells him he can't trust them and sincerely asks for her help, and he wishes to protect his mother. This surprises her, and she recalls witnessing a mother sacrifice her life for her son after he stood up for her. And we learn that is why she killed that king previously mentioned. She comments about how Larson has been monitored his whole life, and the family abandoned his mother, and that Larson had to put on an act to degrade his value. And he's serious about observing his mother, but it's impossible because in the maiden family, everyone is strong, and he's just a scoundrel, a byproduct of lowly birth. So his dream is impossible to achieve, but still, his dream is not wrong, and she says dreams don't need to always be fulfilled, and chasing something is also considered a dream. She says, to be clear, I am not helping you because of the chocolates. We see Larson is happy, and it cuts to her preparing to feed Larson the Karshan, telling him what she plans to do. And that there's a chance his body may freeze, and if he's lucky, it'll only last a few months, and worst case, a few years or death. He wonders how she can say it so calmly, and she tells him that she's a capable mage, so she'll do her best to ensure it doesn't happen. He contemplates waiting to absorb the Karshan, and realizes he has to do this, and Evian will do her best to stop anything from going wrong. He tells her he's ready, and she reminds him that she's still a full-fledged mage, so she will need to be paid for her work. And tells him it's not much, just give me 24 chocolates. It cuts to a bloody Persia, asking Sando if Larson has consumed the Karshan, and she informs her Evian has helped him. She asks if she meant the librarian, and wonders how he convinced her to do that. Sando says she couldn't get closer, so that's all she knows, and apologizes. Persia is surprised by his trump card, and comments that the Karshan was a special grade, so if it weren't someone of Evian's level helping him, then he would have died while consuming it. And says he must know that Evian's name is Larvian, and she asks if he's properly consumed it, and Sando says yes, but as a byproduct, his body has become extremely sturdy, and it even surprised Evian. And even his consumption speed was very fast. Persia asks Sando how long it'll take him to fully absorb all of the mana, and mentions how it usually takes 3 years, but he'll probably do it in 1. Sando says, based on the current speed, 3 weeks will be good enough, which shocks Persia. It cuts to him running, and he mentions how he's not tired, even after running for a few hours, and he says it feels as if there's too much mana, and it's going to burst out. He tells Hampton to take him to the waterfall garden, and we see him climbing the waterfall and says it'll consume more energy compared to running. He then tells Hampton to bring him a weight, something made of lead. We see his magic technique begins to protect his body as he climbs, and the techniques begin to upgrade in tiers. He comments on how his body feels lighter. We see as it goes week by week, he increases the weight, and Hampton warns him not to injure himself. Larson comments on how he's overflowing with energy, even without having slept much recently. And it cuts to Samba telling Persia he's fully absorbed the Karshan's mana, and that he has a monstrous body, and informs Persia he's been climbing the waterfall daily. Persia asks if he's using magic, and Samba tells her he's using magic combat techniques. Persia comments that combat techniques have rapid growth, but quickly hit their limit. Samba tells her that he's been climbing with 50 kilograms, and Persia is confused and asks if she means 5 kilograms. Samba also tells her he climbs it very quickly, and Persia says he's overflowing with vitality and wonders how long he can live for. Samba says if they leave him be, then he will die in 3 months, that there's too much mana in his body, and if it weren't for his special power protecting his body, he would have exploded already, but if Persia helps him, he might survive. Persia says it's troublesome, and she's already done her part, so for now, they should just watch. And if it looks like he's going to die, then they need to figure out how he got Evian to help him. It cuts back to Larson, and he comments on how much he's changed after absorbing the mana. It shows him drinking tea with his mother, and she asks if he thinks he's lost too much weight or not, and he tells her it's just from exercising. She tells him while it's nice to look good, his health should be more important, and he tells her he's very healthy. Then his mother compliments the tea Hira made, which makes her happy, and she compliments her too. Larson is glad his mother and Hira are friendly, and comments on how her blue dot has faded a lot too, and that things are going well. It cuts to Larson lying in bed talking about the dates, and he mentions that it's an important birthday, but the real importance is that someone named Ludia will come to his house from the West Gate, and that they are part of the Tribe of Fire, and nicknamed the Crimson Butcher, and One-Armed Sorceress. And that she will get into some trouble and be kicked out from the West Gate, but will get caught by his sister, and that's why she became one-armed. And after that day, she held a grudge toward the Maitons and became Cassan's greatest ally, and she possesses the power of fire, and Cassan makes a contract with her tribe, and assists them on the battlefield. So it would be great if he could get one of the artifacts from her that would have gone to Cassan. He realizes someone in stealth, and recognizes her as Persia's shadow. He decides it's better to feign ignorance, and decides to deactivate his heavenly eye so he doesn't notice her. But he's unable to deactivate it, so he decides to act like he's sleeping. She misunderstands the situation, and is shocked to learn he can cultivate his mana in his sleep, and she mentions how dangerous the task is and just the slightest loss of concentration may kill you, but he's able to do it while sleeping? She is confused and doesn't know how to report this. Because all he did was learn the basic technique, and she doesn't think it's an outstanding technique, but is shocked that it's active while he's asleep, and it's stable. She also comments on how he was able to fuse the Karshan mana with his own, and went through a big physical change, and that the fused mana is being gathered into his heart. But he seems way too healthy, and has no issues with his heart. Rather, his mana is stabilizing further as it goes. And his heart is abnormally strong. He finally stops faking sleep, and it cuts to him outside, and he tells Hira and Hampton to follow him. They ask where they are going, and he tells them they are going to the West Gate. We learn there are 4 gates, and the West Gate is the outermost gate, and that today he is going to meet Ludia. We see a girl panting, and she tells some people she is going to kill them while imbuing her hand with fire, and Larson wonders if it's too late. We see under Ludia's character information, that she is extremely super-minded, and he regrets writing her so half-assed. Hampton asks what she's doing, and Larson tells Hampton to scatter paralyzing poison, and to make sure to paralyze Ludia no matter what. Hampton throws the poison toward her, and we see the bag fly over her head and bursts into a powder, and she falls flat onto her face. One of the guards stops Larson by asking who he is, and he tells them he came from inside, and calls him incapable, wondering how he's a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper asks who he is, and Larson tells him he'll be taking Ludia, and the gatekeeper tells him he can't do that, and to reveal his identity. Hampton clears his throat and begins to spit some facts about Larson's family, and introduces him to the gatekeeper as the 7th son. The gatekeeper yells, asking what kind of nonsense is that, saying that they obviously don't know what Larson looks like, and he's ugly. Larson asks for his name, saying he'll remember it, and asks if he really thinks anyone would try to impersonate Larson, and everyone knows that Larson is a scoundrel, and an ugly pig. And asks again if he thinks anyone would impersonate him, and if he doesn't believe that he's Larson, then send someone to the main family and confirm it, but if he acts arrogant and ignores his words, then he'll make sure he pays greatly when he realizes he's the young master. The gatekeeper gets on his knees and bows to Larson, apologizing, and he asks why Larson is trying to take the girl away. Larson didn't come up with an excuse, and decides to wing it and says she's attractive, and the gatekeeper says he understands, while Hira looks confused. It cuts to Ludia tied up, and everyone is looking over her. Larson gains a notice saying that because the predictability has been affected, a new variable has occurred. Larson wonders what it is, and we see Ludia wakes up and begins barking at them. He cannot understand her because of the tape over her mouth, but he realizes he needs to treat her simply, and asks if her father is sick. And he tells her his mother is sick, so he knows why she is here, and he tells her he knows that she's a mage from Hiron, and part of the tribe of fire. And he knows her territory is dealing with an epidemic currently, but he knows a way to cure it. And that she probably came here recklessly because she thought his family has the cure. And asks if she understands what he just said, and to nod her head to confirm. She nods her head, and gets Hira to take the tape off her mouth, and asks if she's calmed down now. She asks if he's really going to help, and he says he already told her he would help, and she asks why? He tells her it isn't important, and she says nobles won't help for free, at least that's what her father said. Larson asks why she came if she thought that was the case, and she said she has something valuable to offer. Larson recognizes that she means the Holy Grail of Fire, the artifact Casson originally got. He tells her he'll cure her father, but it will take a lot of money. She says she doesn't have any, and he tells her to just pay him back later, and he'll only know how much after treating him first. She says she'll do whatever she can to pay him back, and he asks about the valuable item she mentioned, and she says she'll give him that too. With the negotiations complete, he tells Hampton to scatter 1,000-year herb around her territory, and to boil the herb with the silver sea water there, and it'll cure the epidemic. Hampton says he's never heard of this type of medicine before, and asks him to explain it, and Larson tells him not to doubt his light. Hampton begins to admire him and says he'll do it. Hira tells Larson she wants to ask him something, and he asks if she wants to know about how he knows about the medicine, and she says yes, and that she's unable to understand it. He simply tells her he's a maiden, and she hesitates for a second, then thanks him for the lesson. And she says looking at Larson is like looking at the patriarch when he was younger. Larson tells Ludia he'll release her now, and she gets angry, saying she's never told him her name before, and asks how he knew it, and Larson realizes he made a mistake. He tells himself not to panic, and asks if it's strange he knows her name. She says very. He asks if it's strange that he's using an expensive herb on her, and she says it's strange. He asks if it's strange he's telling her a secret only available to the maiden family, and she says it's strange. And he asks if it's not something that benefits her greatly, and she says it's strange. And he asks if she understands she just showed bloodlust to someone who might be her savior, and she gets embarrassed, saying yeah, and she apologizes. He gets her to repeat it, and she says she was in the wrong, and is sorry. He accepts her apology, and tells her to stay here first. She asks why, and he reminds her she just attacked the maiden family. Larson asks what the gatekeepers said, and she said they told her it isn't a place for lowly people like herself, and that if someone like her lost her father, it didn't matter, so she was going to kill them all. Because she loves her father, and they told him to die. Larson tells Hira to release her, and she asks who Larson is, and why he's treating her so well. He introduces himself, and it takes her smooth brain a second to recognize who he is, then asks if he's the scoundrel. He asks if that's what the rumors say, and she says yeah, that he's meant to be total trash, but she sees that it was false, and he's a good guy. Another status window appears, saying an unexpected variable has occurred, and he wonders if making her his ally is truly the right thing to do, and he decides to keep observing for now. It cuts back to the mansion, and we see Hampton telling Larson he's gathered the herbs like he ordered, so he'll depart for Hiron immediately, and it'll take him around 3 days to get there. He asks Larson why he helped Ludia, and Larson says it's unfair for someone to die of a treatable illness, and because it's her father, it doesn't cost him anything to help. Hampton thinks to himself and compliments Larson, and says he's met the true light, and tells him he'll be back. Though the real reason he helped her is because of the Holy Grail of Fire. 2 days later, we see Persia has arrived, and wonders what Larson has brought back. She sees Larson, asks who he is, because nobody in the Maitons has been this handsome. Larson tells her it's him, and she says it feels like he's hiding things, and he tells her isn't, but we know he is. She asks how he became so cute, and compliments his looks while grabbing his face. He feels like his heart is about to freeze, and his magic combat technique begins to protect him. He's surprised by its activating just from locking eyes with her, and she compliments him for achieving it all in 3 weeks. She pats his head and says his face is a pass, and if he continues to grow like this, she'll pamper him a lot. He tells her he doesn't need it, and thinks it must be another test, and he tells her he wants to become her rival, or an ally, rather than being pampered. She says he'll make a great piece of art if she decorates his decapitated head, and he tells her not to make such a bad joke. She says it wasn't a joke, and she wants to see the toy he brought back. He wonders why she wants to see her, and says that Persia doesn't like other talented fire mages, so he mustn't let them meet. He tells her he found the toy, and he doesn't intend to show her. She releases killing intent and says he keeps trying to step over her, he resists it with his combat technique, and she commends him on it. Her mana continues to pressure him, and she releases it and says she'll give him a chance. And explains she'll just use one finger to fight, and she won't use any elements, and only combat techniques. He asks if she knows combat techniques, and she says she's read about them briefly. Larson smirks and tells her he'll use everything he has to defeat her, and she compliments him again, and launches a fire snake toward him. His heavenly eye detects the illusion, and he punches it, destroying it. She's glad he's grown a lot since their previous encounter, and tells him if he wins, she'll leave his toy alone, so he better give it his best shot. Because if she isn't entertained, she'll destroy his toy. She never thought he'd entertain her this much, especially since he's the son that father threw away. We see Larson leaping at her, and she tells him he's too slow and hits him with her finger. He blocks it, and it sends him backward. He lands on his feet, and he realizes if it continues like this, it'll be disadvantageous for him, and the difference between them is too large for him to dodge and attack her. His iron will protects his body, and he's surprised by his mana being in shambles just from one finger. His cultivation calms his mana down, and he realizes this is his only chance, and he'll be aiming for her right leg. He grabs onto her leg and swipes her other foot, causing her to fall, and he channels mana into his fist, and slams it down into her face. He is surprised to see all of the bones in his hand is crushed, and that she's used defensive magic. She asks if he charged in like that because she let her guard down, and he tells her yes, and it was his only chance. She tells him his combat technique is unsightly, and that's why she dislikes them. He tells her it wasn't classy, but she still lost, while holding onto his shattered fist. She uses her magic to lift him up and throws him into the wall, making him cough up blood. She tells him he won the bet, and she'll ignore his toy, but he keeps piquing her interest. She comments on how tough his body is, and to test it, she puts some strength into her last attack, but it turns out he's still weak. She says she'll see him again, and vanishes into flames. She finds it interesting that he absorbed her mana, and that's why she went overboard. But she also added some healing mana, so if he uses it well, he can learn from it. Sando says it seems like she adores Larson, and Persia tells her he's interesting. Sando mentions how she gave him a gift, and Persia says while she did give him one, if he fails to use it properly, his body will fall apart. It cuts back to Larson continuing to cough up blood, and we see his status window says he's fulfilled a special requirement, and his self-recovery technique has been enlightened. And he realizes anytime he meets Persia, he receives a great opportunity. His body begins to heal, and we see another message mentioning body restructuring will now start, which confuses him. Then he starts to become overwhelmed with intense pain, and says it feels like his bones are being pulverized. We see some nasty-ass goo leaking from his ear, and other parts of his body, and he begins to scream in pain as his fingers begin to move uncontrollably. His techniques begin to engrave themselves into his body, and we see Haria and Ludia run into the room. Haria sees the room is covered in black powder, and wonders if it's poison, then says it's too weak, and wonders if it's fog made from waste. Another status window saying reconstruction requires a large amount of mana appears, and Larson wonders where his mana is disappearing to. Another window appears, saying he has insufficient mana, and if it continues to be insufficient, then the process will stop, and he'll have a terrible side effect. Larson sees fire, and then sees Ludia spewing flames toward him, saying she'll help him, and he begins to absorb her mana, as it's great for purification. He thanks her and begins to walk out of her fire, and we see the body reconstruction has been completed. They call out to Larson, and another window appears, saying his heavenly body has been activated. And we see he's gained some significant muscle from the reconstruction. Larson mentions how the heavenly body is the physique that Casson was born with, and that it's part of the requirements for an attribute known as Sword Emperor, which is what Casson had since the start. And he wonders why he keeps getting things that are meant to be for Casson. He tells Hera to bring him clothes, and he realizes he must hide his attribute. We see Ludia talking to Hera about her father already being cured, and after he wrote a letter saying how everyone in the village has gotten better, and thanks to Larson, the epidemic is disappearing. Ludia wipes a tear out of her eyes while reading the letter, and tells Larson she'll repay his kindness. She tells him she'll be her contractor, and we learn the contract of fire is what Casson made with Ludia later in the story, and the tribe members can only make the promise once. And it entails them devoting their lives to the contractee. Larson realizes if he makes the contract with her, then the original story will change a lot, and that the future Ludia from his story will disappear. But he doesn't care, because he needs to get out of Casson's grip by the time he reaches 17. He tells her if that's what she wants, and she makes the oath in front of Larson, and as he's watching the Oath of Fire, he notices the status window mentioning some of the settings are being revealed, and he gains authority of berserk restraint, and he explains that in the novel Ludia would go berserk often because her brain is smooth, and now he can control her rampages. He sees that if he stops her, then she will die, and he tells her doesn't want to do it, and she says it's a good thing though. He asks how, and she cannot answer, and he tells her that she'll need to sacrifice her life to him, but she thinks that is a good thing. He asks why, and she says it's cool, and he explains if she rampages and he stops her, then she will die. And she tells him that's fine, and it would be her honor. He tells her he doesn't want that, and she tells him to stop worrying, because she won't die. He tells her that she's only 9, so she's too young to become anyone's contractor, and she says it doesn't matter what her age is. He says maybe to her it doesn't, and he tells her he thinks it's too much of a responsibility, and that they are too young to understand the contract of fire. She tells him he'll wait, and calls him a good person. At least, that's what her father said. And explains that he told her if anyone rejects the contract, they are a good person, and they are someone she can trust, so don't let someone like that go. It cuts to her saying how good the chocolate is, and he tells her it's time for the valuable thing she mentioned previously. And he comments on how it must be the Holy Grail of Fire, and mentions where it's located. She says the item is in her neighborhood, and Larson asks for the name, but she doesn't know, but she knows it's a cup. He uses his heavenly eye to learn more about the Holy Grail, and sees it means the owner won't die from poison, and can resist mind magic, and other great things, so it's perfect for living a long life. He tells her it's time to go, and Hera asks if he needs an escort, and Larson remembers that every maiden needs an escort, and he wonders what excuse he needs to give, for his family to provide him with an escort to Ludia's hometown. And he realizes he can't lie, and that the escorts will be supporting one of his siblings, and he contemplates on what to do. When he makes up his mind, it cuts to a mage named Jaffel, and he's on bad terms with Larson, and he wonders why Larson wants him to be his escort. It cuts to a flashback from 3 years ago, where Larson is telling Jaffel that he's just a dog, and should listen to his owner. Larson remembers it and regrets the past him acting like that. Hera asks what she should say on the document, and he tells her to just put that he wants to try their chocolate. She says there's no way that would work, but it is instantly approved. It shows Jaffel arriving at the mansion, and Larson greets him, but this makes Jaffel angry. He tells Larson he's changed a lot since their last meeting, and he asks if he can ask a question, and Larson asks if he's curious as to why he was chosen to be his escort. Jaffel says exactly, and that he's just a dog. Larson tells him since he's just a guard dog, he should guard the owner too. This angers Jaffel, and Larson tells him among the dogs that he's the most trustworthy, and he doesn't think he'll betray him. Jaffel asks if he trusts him, and Larson says he doesn't trust Jaffel himself, but he trusts in Jaffel's ability as an escort, and that he's ambitious. And he explains that Jaffel is extremely trustworthy, and explains that he swaps from being loyal from his fourth brother, to his second sister. Jaffel asks Larson how his ambitions are linked to him being chosen as an escort, and Larson tells him he could be useful to him one day. Then tells Jaffel he knows that he's planning to swap his loyalty to his second sister, and this shocks Jaffel. Then he tells Larson he's just an escort, so he has no allegiances. Larson comments that despite him saying that he's quite emotional, and that it doesn't matter to him, and what other reason would an escort need to protect his owner? Larson orders him as a maiden to protect him, and Jaffel accepts the order, and questions how Larson changed so quickly, and comments on how full of mana his circle is, and says even the second sister couldn't have a circle that full of mana. It cuts to them walking, and Ludia is excited that she's going to see her father. Larson explains that while her tribe had a ton of power previously, the god they serve used up its powers, and they've gone downhill since then. We see Ludia inhale a large amount of air, and then she screams, letting out what we can only assume is hockey. We see Hampton run up, and he apologizes to Larson for not greeting him, and Ludia asks where her father is. He tells her he's at home, and we see her running off to greet her father. Jaffel is still baffled by how Larson knew his intentions, but it cuts back to Ludia hugging her father, and he thanks Larson. Jaffel wonders why Ludia is her friend, and why all of the townsfolk are showing gratitude toward Larson, and he wonders what Larson did without anyone having noticed. Ludia grabs Larson and guides him to the present, and we see them arrive at a tombstone made with stacked stones. Ludia begins to speak enchantment table, and the rocks begin to shift, allowing for the holy grail of fire to emerge from the stones. Jaffel wonders what the grail is, and realizes that Larson saying he was here for chocolates was a lie, and he can feel a weird mana from the cup. Larson looks at the cup and the heavenly eye, and we see some more backstory settings are explained. If someone who didn't make a contract of fire drank from the grail, then why would die? So he must make a contract to drink from it, and the longer he waits, the worse the quality becomes. And he realizes that he'll need to be in charge of controlling Ludia, and wonders if he will be able to do it. He wonders what the Oldham would do, then resolves himself, and asks her to form the contract. She looks excited that he wants to, and he tells her they need to do it quickly. She says okay, and the Holy Grail begins to change form after recognizing the contract of fire. Jaffel is shocked by the Grail glowing, and realizes Larson planned all of this from the start, and he compliments Ludia's mana, saying how pure it is. And that he's sure the information about Larson has been misinformation. Ludia tells Larson the contract is finished, then the status window appears, mentioning an unexpected variable again. And we see a massive amount of fire energy in Larson, but then it vanishes, and the status window says the Holy Grail has evolved. Larson grabs onto the Grail, and drinks the water inside of it. His cultivation technique begins to manage the fire energy, and he tells Jaffel to protect him. Jaffel is confused why he's suddenly cultivating his mana in the middle of the open, and mentions how if he takes even the slightest bit of damage, it'll cause great harm to his body. Jaffel recalls him saying he trusted in his abilities, and creates a barrier around Larson. We see Larson's self-recovery activate, along with the water from the Grail being absorbed into his body, but after some time, the Heavenly Eye deactivates, and we see it's now nighttime. Jaffel asks if he's finished, and Larson replies by saying yes, and thanks him for protecting him. Jaffel says he's just doing as he was ordered, and it seems as if Larson has gained some kind of power. Jaffel also tells him that this area is the entrance of the Dragon Mountain, and he feels a powerful mana approaching them, purposefully making their existence known. Larson asks if he knows who they are, and Jaffel says they seem to be swordsmen, and they'll soon reach them, and one of them seems to be very powerful. Larson explains that swordsmen are rivals to mages, and he doesn't know why they are coming, but it's too late to outrun them, and he would be executed by his father if he ran away. And with Jaffel, there's no point in running away. They arrive in front of them, and the Heavenly Eye activates. Larson is surprised to find out that the real protagonist of the world, the one with massive amounts of plot armor, Cassin Shade, is standing before him. It's not just Cassin, but the guardian knights of his family are there too, and he's sure Cassin recognizes him as a maiden too. Cassin approaches them, and bows his head, saying he came because he felt a powerful mana wave, and that there was a surge of fire mana too. And he came because he was curious. Larson says it seems like he knows who he is, and Cassin says he doesn't know who exactly he is, but he knows he is a maiden. And he thought he was the sixth son, but he uses water magic, but he doesn't smell water on him at all, and asks if he is the fifth son. Larson wanted to avoid getting involved with him, and he wonders how to deal with the situation, and debates what to do, and realizes if he gets caught lying, it would be difficult. So he just tells him that his fifth brother uses mainly earth magic. Cassin asks if he's the seventh son then, and Larson laughs and says he's much different from the rumors, right? Cassin agrees, and we see his guards are flabbergasted. Larson tells Cassin to speak casually since they are the same age, and he gives some backstory about Cassin, on how he's always had an abundance of things, but he never had friends his age. Ludia grabs Larson's arm and asks if Cassin is his friend, and she introduces herself, and says that he's handsome. Casson blushes and tells her his name, and she compliments his name too. Casson quickly changes the subject, and asks Larson what the mana wave he felt just now was. After an explanation, Casson says it seems as if he gained a good opportunity, and Larson says that he did. Casson asks what kind of power the mana held, and Larson says it protects from external influences. Casson quickly understands it's like poison and stuff, and says it's a good power. Jaffel realizes if the Shades attack them, they would be helpless, but is surprised they are just standing there. We see Ludia and Casson talking, and Larson calls out to him, and says he's never seen someone from the Shade family before, on top of that, someone the same age as him. They shake hands, and Casson says it's the same for him. Larson tells him he's heard that in the swordsman family, they have to cross swords before they can be friends, but doesn't know what it's called. And Casson tells him it's a duel, and Larson asks if he wants to try one, and that he heard it's mandatory to become friends. Casson says it's not a requirement, but confirms if he's asking for a duel? And Larson says exactly, and realizes it's a good opportunity to see how big the gap between them is. Jaffel is confused by the duel request, because there are guardian knights on Casson's side, and that he cannot step in. And because Larson is a maiden, he cannot step in to stop him, and especially because of the Shade family, because it could represent him looking down on the bloodline. Casson asks Larson if he's learned swordsmanship, and he says no, and he's only learned magic combat techniques. Casson comments on how nobody is learning those, and Larson says it's all he's good at. Casson asks why he requests the duel, and he's heard that the maidens don't like his family. Larson mentions how Casson has no friends, and everyone is shocked, but Larson says he doesn't either, so they are in the same situation. And he guesses it's because of the families they were born into. And he tells Casson that it's harder for him to find friends, because his family doesn't allow them, and they are only allowed friends under the guise of business. And he doesn't believe in that as a friend. Thus, he has none. But he thinks that his family will allow Casson, and that's why he requested the duel, and he mentions how Casson's family really cares for trust, and if there isn't a solid foundation of trust, then it can lead to someone being hurt. Casson agrees, and Larson tells him he can think of his techniques as martial arts, and Casson tells him he'll only use his family's basic swordsmanship, and because Larson is unarmed, he'll grant him the first 3 hits. Larson asks who would win if they dueled, and Casson is hesitant to answer, and Larson tells him it would, of course, be him. But asks why he requested a duel if he already knew the outcome, and Casson says because he wants to be friends, and they talk about if it matters who wins or not, and Larson tells him if he only wanted to win, he wouldn't have requested a duel, but he wants to be friends, and that friends should be equal to each other, and to treat him casually. Casson tells him he has no intention of insulting him, and Larson tells him he's going to do his best, so he wants him to do his best as well. The duel starts, and we see Casson thrust his sword at Larson, but flow slowly activates, and he sidesteps it, and he jumps backward to create space. Larson charges back in, but is stopped by another thrust from Casson, and Larson wonders how to close the gap so he can use his techniques, but if he goes in too close, he'll be in Casson's range, and if he doesn't try to go in then he'll continuously be attacked, and he's expected as much from Casson, but now he's able to kind of read his attack trajectory. He rushes in past one of Casson's attacks, thinking it's a feint, but realizes it isn't, and Casson changed it to a real attack, but it's too late to dodge, so he has to tank the hit. He blocks it, and we see him kneeling in pain, and Casson points his sword at him, to which Larson admits defeat. Jaffel is shocked, but is glad it ended without any problems. Casson asks Larson how his arm is, and he tells him it's fine. Casson comments on his defense, and that he was surprised by the sparks from when he hit him. Larson is confused about what he means by sparks, and thinks maybe Ludia did something. And Casson explains to him that his sword is of high quality, and can cut steel. Larson is shocked because it hit his arm. Casson tells him he tried to lower the power, but is still surprised by his defense, and Larson thanks him, and says he knew he would lose because of their gap in ability. Casson stretches his hand out to Larson, and says others find it hard to approach him, and Larson says it's because everyone is weaker than him, and it's not strange for the weak to find it hard to approach him, and Casson asks if that makes him strange then, and Larson says he just felt as if he could trust him, and Casson laughs saying he's never met anyone like him before. This reminds me of the fox and the hound. Casson says it was nice meeting him, and tells him they should meet again, and disappears. The status window appears again, mentioning that an unexpected variable has occurred. As he wonders about it, Jaffel asks him when he learned fire magic, but Larson doesn't know when he used it, but realizes the fire energy near his heart isn't strong. But it's still there, and that it contains fire energy. He analyzes the fight with Heavenly Eye, and we see that he uses fire mana to help block Cassin's attack, and that the water from the Grail fused with his cultivation technique, but is confused because it should be impossible to fuse an element with a combat technique, and even if it was possible he'd have to be an advanced mage like Persia, and even then it would suck. Jaffel asks how he did it, and Larson says he doesn't know, and Jaffel is confused about how he doesn't know, and thinks that he actually does, but doesn't want to tell him how, and he wonders if he planned beforehand to meet Cassin. And if his plans are this developed, then he must be getting help from someone else like Persia, and he realizes he better play his cards right. He tells Larson he'll take him back to the Maiden family, and we see Lydia yelling at Larson to take back his words, and he wonders what she means, but recalls that he told Cassin he has no friends. She tells him she thought of him as a friend, and he tells her she's his friend too, and she asks why he told Cassin that then. And he tells her he made a mistake. And she says as long as he means it, then it's all good. And she tells him that she'll forgive him this time because he forgot. It cuts to Larson having dinner with his mother, and Larson asks his mother what his father is like, and we learn he has no memories of him, because Larson never met him previously. She tells him that he's lonely, which shocks Larson, and we see on the status window that his father loves his mother. And we hear a voice saying, "I'm lonely, huh?" And a portal begins to form on the wall, and a man emerges from it, and it is Larson's father Decatra. They both greet him, and Larson comments that the air has gotten dense from his appearance, and that it makes it hard to breathe, and that his body is afraid of him. His father calls out to him, and says he heard something terrible happen to Larson and his brother, and Larson says yes. His father asks why he did it, and Larson says because his brother was attempting to push him with his fist rather than magic. And he felt as if the honor of mages was being ruined, so he responded using the commandments of mana. And he wanted to end the fight quickly, and because his brother is a mage, he wasn't fatally injured, and he tried to bring his brother to his senses. And he doesn't think the succession war is simply about spilling blood, and he doesn't believe his siblings as enemies, but rather the Grandel family and the Chaudet family are the enemies. His father says he likes what he said, and Larson says that the sixth brother should be thankful for the experience he gave him in fighting a martial artist. Decatra comments on how he had no expectations for Larson, but compared to the sixth son, he's much better. Larson says if his brother holds a grudge, he has no right to be a maiden. Larson wonders if what he said is enough, and that he's scared. And we learn that the only person his father has loved was his mother, and the reason Larson was able to survive until 17 previously was because of his mother, and Larson says it makes sense, because while it wasn't stated in the novel, his mother would die from Blue Dot later, and when she died he died too. And because Larson was so weak previously, he was of no use to the family, and they were banished from the family because he didn't want the only wife he loved to be harmed, because the other mothers knew he loved her. And he realizes if he continues to act like a decent human, and if he's able to protect his mother, then everything will change. He tells his father he plans to do his best, and they talk about how magic techniques are weak, and a waste of time, but Larson tells him he will become capable enough to support him, and while his magic has limits, he himself doesn't, and that he carries his blood, so he will climb higher and protect his mother. His father lets a slight smirk out, and it cuts to Hampton and Larson reading a note from his father, and it's an invitation to a banquet, for the 10th year ceremony. Which is when a member of the Maiden family becomes 10, everyone gathers and enjoys themselves, and it is when they receive a physical strengthening magic. It's not just a normal strengthening, but it's when a family member gains an attribute for their mana. We see Larson in a suit, and him and Hera head into the banquet hall. Larson looks at the table and wonders where to sit, and Hera says it'll be opposite of the patriarch. He asks where his mother will sit, and Hera tells him she wasn't invited. We see his brother Carlin yelling out, asking if he is Larson, and he's surprised by how much he's changed, and Larson tells him if he thinks he lost because he let his guard down, then feel free to challenge him again. Carlin tells him he'll trample him soon, and Larson tells him to try it. Persia walks into the banquet hall too, and greets Larson, and asks if he's having fun with the toy he took previously, and mentions how they had a bet, which shocks Carlin, because not only did he make a bet with Persia, but he won too. We see a blonde woman enter the room, and Larson is surprised, and we learn that it's his second sister Ivelia, and while she is gentle, she would do anything for the family. and how she was killed by Kassan, but she is also his first love. She sits beside Persia, and says Larsen's changed a lot, and Larsen begins to feel panicked after seeing his sisters, because he realizes how strong they are and that he's been arrogant. It shows other family members enter the room, even his father, and Dekatra congratulates Larsen, and others do too. Ivelia stands up and says she's killed some monsters for father, and the other siblings share what they've done. And we learn that Persia stole a pair of wings from a temple, which shocks Larsen, because Heavenly Eye activates and shows him that she slaughtered everyone inside the temple. A knock arrives at the door, and we see Dekatra's right-hand man Senkin enters carrying a bunch of scrolls, and he sits them down in front of Larsen. And Dekatra tells him to make his choice. Larsen looks at them, and his Heavenly Eye activates to show us the energy from the scrolls all fusing together to make a new scroll, and he grabs it, which surprises everyone because he's picked the transcendent attribute, and he tells them he will choose this one. Saw June would be proud of our boy. Dekatra asks Ivelia if she told Larsen about the scroll, and she says no. Then the rest of the siblings say they also didn't. And he's asking if he's meant to believe that a 10-year-old did it all by himself, something even Ivelia couldn't do. And she says he has a better eye than she did at 10. Persia is surprised, and they conclude that it's due to him being talented in magic combat techniques, since none of them learned it. He tells Larsen to bring him the scroll, and as he's walking over, Larsen briefly explains the elements again, and how the scroll he picked is all of them combined. Dekatra compliments him on picking the scroll, and tells him Ivelia will help him with the scroll, which confused Larsen, but Dekatra says if he does it, then there's a high chance Larsen would die. And because her mana is softer than his, there's a higher chance he'll survive. Larsen tells Ivelia he'll leave it to her, and she explains that it's a dangerous thing, so his chances are only 50%. Larsen asks if she thinks he should pick a different scroll, and she says she wishes for him to be strong. And he tells her he'll stick with this one, and she tells him to take his clothes off, and he begins to pull a magic mic. Persia is surprised by how much muscular development he has, and wonders what secrets he has. We see her put her hand on him, thanking him for letting her carry it out, and as she goes to start, he tells her to wait, and that he has to tell father something. He tells him if he survives, then do him a favor. Everyone is shocked by his request, and Larsen says it's tradition for the patriarch to carry out the operation, and because Dekatra isn't doing it, he owes him this. Dekatra asks what the favor is, and Larsen asks if he'll allow his mother to visit this place. The other wives get angry, saying a lowly being doesn't belong here. Larsen says that he's still Dekatra's son, so calling his mother inferior is indirectly calling Dekatra inferior. Dekatra asks Larsen why he wants his mother here, and he replies that his mother wants to see him, which surprises Dekatra, and he says if he survives, he'll allow it, so try staying alive. Ivelia starts the operation, and begins with a chant, and Larsen's body begins to heat up, as if he was being branded. And he hears a voice saying it'll help him, and he's surprised because he can no longer feel his limbs, and compares the feeling to being anesthetized. He's surprised by a ball of fire in front of him, and he looks closer to see it's the Holy Grail of fire. Larsen wonders where he is, and why the Grail is here, and it tells him that it is actually not the Holy Grail of fire, but the Holy Grail of transcendence. Larsen cannot analyze it with his Heavenly Eye, and it tells him that the Fire Clan is misunderstanding, and he had fire mana poured into him by Kirtle, but he knows Larsen won't know who that is. And Larsen recognizes the name from legends, and thinks about the sage Alberto. The Grail tells Larsen he wants to help him, and Larsen asks how. The Grail explains that his body is special, and that he has a heavenly body, which makes it strong, but not strong enough to take the mana it's trying to take in currently. Because his circle is already saturated, and the Grail asks if he knows what will happen if that power enters his body, and Larsen realizes he would die. The Grail says he doesn't want him to die, because it would be boring, and he'd have to sleep for another century. And it tells Larsen it'll consume the mana for him, and Larsen realizes if he doesn't consume it, his body will explode, so he has to believe in the Grail's words. The Heavenly Eye says the Grail has been desperately searching for his true owner, and Larsen explains that when the Grail was Kassan's, it never acted like this. The Grail tells him he has the qualifications to be his owner, because Larsen's existence is full of holes, and that's a requirement to take him in. Larsen asks what he means, and Grail, new nickname, tells him he'll see later, so he'll just get to the point. And asks Larsen to be his owner. And says he's melted into his heart currently, so he'll eat the mana, which will allow him to be reborn as the Holy Grail of Transcendence. Grail tells him that his scary sister will take care of it, so he's gonna take a break while resting inside Larsen's heart, and he'll come back when it's necessary. And that he'll have to use him a lot in the future. The Heavenly Eye explains that Grail will act as another mana circle. Larsen likes this, and when he goes to accept Grail's help, his body begins to fade out. And he realizes he will die if it continues, and he doesn't want to die, so he accepts ownership of Grail, and we see the cup spew an enormous flame, and then Larsen wakes up to Ivelia saying the operation is complete. Larsen is surprised he's alive, and wonders if it was a dream, but feels the changes in his heart. And Larsen hears Ivelia tell their father that the operation was a failure, and the scroll has been extinguished, and she says she isn't good enough. Decatra walks off while saying it's just Larsen's fate, and Larsen realizes it wasn't extinguished, but that Grail consumed it. Larsen calls out to his father and reminds him of their deal. We see everyone leaving, and Larsen puts his clothes back on, and is glad with how things have turned out. He calls out to Hera, telling her it's time to go, but is surprised that she is exuding bloodlust. And she says there's something she would like to ask. Even the Heavenly Eye cannot read her status window, but Larsen can tell that there is a security magic in place, and realizes the only person who could set it up would be his father. Hera asks him who he thinks hired her, and he tells her he would assume his father did, and when she asks why, he tells her because she's not hiding her aura even with his father being in the building. She calls him amusing, asking if he can feel her aura, and he tells her yes, and that it's scary. She calls him weak, and he tells her he's only 10. And she asks if his reasoning behind the aura is enough for him to make the assumption on who hired her, and Larsen explains more about how she's letting out aura, and even with all of the mages in the building, nobody is coming, so there must be something that is preventing her aura from being detected. And that the only person who can cast security magic like that would be his father. And that she must have taken orders to reveal her aura to Larsen. And she says that he's right, and she was told she can do whatever she likes if he couldn't analyze the situation. But Decatra said he would need to be able to do this much to prove he is a maiden, and Larsen tells her he understands the intentions from all of this, and that his father wanted to test him. Hera draws a knife, and says he is correct. She says she honestly didn't think he would be able to figure it out. Larsen asks what she thought would happen, and she says she thought he would piss himself after she released her aura, and says she will introduce herself to him. She says her name is discreet without a sound, but you can still call me Hera. Larsen recognizes the name, and we learn she is like the boogeyman. She is someone that almost everyone fears. Even the swordsman's family looked for them as an assassin, but they failed due to there not being any information about her. Larsen is surprised that she's so young, and tells her he's heard of her before because she was being looked for. And she tells him she's surprised he knows because it was 15 years ago. After learning how long ago it was, he asks her if her current appearance is fake, and she says she isn't answering that. He asks how she's going to test him, and she tells him if he manages to deflect her attack once, it will be his victory. She then disappears, and the Heavenly Eye activates, but still cannot detect her. She says that his father has told her to get rid of Larsen if he is too weak, and Larsen tells her to wait. He asks her what she'll do for him if he wins. And she says she didn't think he'd ask, but asks what he would like if he wins. And he tells her he wants her to protect him, because he's weak, so protect him until he's strong enough. She agrees, then disappears again. He was confident, but he can't sense anything, and even though she threatened him, she won't be able to kill him, so she won't attack above his neck or his heart. So he will have to deflect her attack by letting himself get hit, and she'll have her guard down. She'll aim for his arms or legs, and the moment she attacks, he will detect her. He mentions his flow slowly ability, and explains how it doesn't only make time slower, but also lets him see mana in slow motion, and that the quality has changed. We see a purple mana ring from around his chest, and we learn that Grail let out mana which upgraded his skills, and now he is able to see Hera's attack, and he looks at her attack, and realizes it's his leg, and while he can dodge, he won't be able to deflect if he does that, so he takes the hit on his knee and rears his fist back and punches at Hera equal rights equal lefts, and she blocks it. He asks if that counts, and she says yes and she'll keep her promise to protect him from now on. And she disappears again. Larsen is happy to have passed the test. It cuts to Hera saying she'll begin her report, and we see her talking to a candle mentioning what Larsen has done, and she compliments his decision making, and says he's unique because her dagger was coated in poison, but he grabbed it barehanded, and despite the poison entering his blood he is fine, so his mana must have purified it, and she will find out if it was luck or not, and she disappears. It cuts back to Larson walking down the street, and Grail pops up asking if he did well, which spooks Larson, but Grail tells him that nobody else can see him. And that he should be praising him, because Hira's dagger had Melia on it. And Larson is shocked to hear that her dagger had poison on it, and he warns Larson that if he receives a big shock, the poison will come back up and melt his body. Larson calls for Hampton, and asks if he knows what Melia is, and Hampton says yes, and he offers to get some for him, and Larson just asks for the antidote instead. After he sends Hampton off, Hira appears beside him, and she explains that she's been appointed as a shadow for him, so a new maid will replace her. He also comments on how her attitude changed, and she says there's no longer a point in acting, and he compliments her on her acting skills. Then he asks her about the dagger, and says it made him angry because if she wasn't going to kill him, then why put poison on it? Hira asks why he pretended not to know, and he explains that it's because he wanted to show her he was fine without the antidote, and now she won't underestimate him. She tells him what the poison was, and he tells her he knows and tells her where it's from, which surprises her that he knew, and she tells him while she's agreed to protect him, there is a time limit, and that he must become strong enough to free her from her duty. He then asks her if she can get him some 1,000-year herb powder, and then he feels his throat is itchy, and he tells her to get him water. He reaches into a bag of 1,000-year herb powder and begins to consume it with water, and Hira notices that his mana is changing, and we see Grail beginning to puke. Larson feels his heart expanding, and Hira wonders what to do because if she moves him, he will die, but she doesn't know what to do because she isn't a mage, and she decides to absorb his mana and die for him. We see the mana continuously expands, and he wonders why he keeps getting near-death experiences. After a bit, his ribs begin to crack, and a status window appears mentioning how managing the reaction is just a requirement, and mentions how if he doesn't have a special body from a swordsman family, he'll die, but there is an exception for those with the heavenly body, and he realizes he can withstand it. Grail tells him he feels better, and to trust him, and we see the mana begins to condense into his heart, and Grail says that his cultivation technique is helping him. Hira watches as Larson's mana goes back to normal, and then she sees fire erupt from Larson, but notices that he is now a second circle. She is surprised because she's never heard of anyone reaching it at 10 years old, and Larson asks if she just plans to stare at him. She apologizes and congratulates him, and she asks if he calmed the mana expansion by himself, to which he replies yeah and says how great he is, and she says it's to be expected of a maiden, and they awkwardly stare at each other. Larson is happy that all of the requirements were met by coincidence, and he asks Hira if she wants to do something, but doesn't say what. It then cuts to Noah sleeping, and Larson waking him up, and he asks why Larson is there so late, but notices the second circle. He asks Larson what he wants, and Larson says he's planning to have a duel with Hira, and we see them inside of the training room. Larson asks if she can duel with his skill level in mind, and asks her not to kill him, and to attack slower, and she tells him an enemy wouldn't be that kind, to which he replies she isn't an enemy, but his shadow. And she agrees. Larson explains that now he's a second circle, the amount of mana he can hold has changed, and he can move the mana however he wants now, and spreads it all over his body. We see his combat magic technique upgrade, and the fight starts. Hira vanishes, and he realizes it's the same pattern as last time, and while he still can't see her, his heavenly eye can detect her movements. And his flow slowly should be stronger now too. We see Hira charging at him, and he realizes she's going for his leg again. He dodges the swing, and she is surprised he could see her, and he dashes in with mana imbued into his fist, and punches straight toward her face. We see her vanish, and a blade is held to his throat, and he compliments her strength. As he goes to declare his loss, she says it first and mentions how she broke her promise to moderate her skills, and says he's improved quite a bit, and she didn't think there'd be this much of a difference. He asks if she's complimenting him, and she tells him not, and that he's still weak. He makes a joke asking if she can compliment him, and she says empty praises are poison. It cuts to Noah watching all of this, and he is shocked that a mage shouldn't be able to move like that, and that Era's movements are barely detectable with detection magic, and that Larson's power is much greater than it was previously. And the scariest part is Hira's last attack, and he realizes it's best to act as if he didn't see anything. Larson apologizes, and waves goodbye, and Noah is surprised he apologized, and then we see a blade to his throat. Hira warns him to forget everything he saw today, and he tells her he didn't see it because he was in the bathroom. Hira says while Larson is a second circle, he still knew it controlling it, and Noah acts surprised about that too, and she calls him smart, then vanishes. Noah wonders what is happening, and it cuts to Larson training, and Hera notifies him of a letter that has arrived, and as he begins to read it, he falls, and says that the swordsman family sent him an invitation, and he realizes this is a variable. It cuts to Dectra having called for Larson, and we see a flashback of him after receiving the letter, and him telling Hera to alert the main residents, and how he plans to be a part of the succession war now. And he says if he wants to kill a tiger, he must go into its den, and Ludia asks to join, which he allows, and he mentions how Cassin wants to be friends with her too, and she likes hearing that. It goes back to the present, and we see Larson enter a room to see Decatra and Ivelia, and he decides it's time to rewrite the world he has created. He asks Decatra if there's an order he wants to give him, and Decatra says that he must already know why he's called him here. And he asks if it's about the invitation from the Sades. And we see a candlelight flicker, and an explosion of ice magic appears, and an icicle points directly at his throat. He asks Decatra why he set this up, and Decatra asks why he thinks he is the one who did it, and Larson says if he wanted him dead, he'd be dead, but he didn't kill him, and he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. Decatra says the Shades should crawl at their feet, and Larson says he agrees, and they should act like dogs in front of them. Larson tells his father about his duel with Cassin, and Decatra asks how he knew Cassin would be there, and he tells him that it was a coincidence. We see Ivelia watching, and she's wondering how Larson has changed so much, and if it was always like this, then that means someone purposefully spread bad information, and she realizes the only person who could have done this would be her father. Larson notifies his father that he will partake in the succession war, and that he knows he can't grow stronger within the family, so he needs to go outside of it to establish his own power. And Decatra asks if he's bringing an outsider into a war between siblings, and Larson says it's his only chance. Decatra asks if he's aware of what he's saying, and Larson says yes, and that he's using Cassin to make him his dog, and how a well-trained wolf can hunt a tiger. Decatra claps back by saying they can also eat their owners, and Larson says if that happens, it's just fate. But he plans to treat him like a dog, and rather than a swordsman, he'll make him a swords dog. This is an actual L of a joke. It cuts to Larson and Ivelia walking, and she asks Larson if he expected everything that happened just now, and he tells her yes, but he didn't know that she would be called too. Larson realizes that Decatra trusts Ivelia to protect Larson from the Sades, and she says it sounds like he's been practicing this conversation. And she tells Larson that at his age, she couldn't talk like that to father, and she asks Larson if the strengthening ritual really failed? And he tells her no. She replies asking about what happened to the mana from the scroll, and says he can't tell her, because father told him not to reveal it. And she confirms her suspicion that Decatra assigned Larson as a variable to her, because he wouldn't be able to talk to Decatra like that otherwise. And if she can't use Larson effectively, then he'll hand him to the other siblings. But since he gave her the opportunity first, she must raise him properly. Larson tells her there's something he wants to show her, and stretches his hand out. She watches as transcendent mana forms from his hand, and turns into a ball, which surprises her. He asks if she can see it, and she says yes, and she can feel the base of the mana is fire. She tells him not to try so hard and how she already sees his potential, because it's hard to hold a physical form of mana, and she doesn't want him to strain himself, because he's already a second circle at such a young age. And she wants to see him live longer. She asks what he's planning, and he tells her that they won't be the only family invited, and Ivelia says the Grandels must have been invited too, and Larson mentions how the Grandels' daughter, Rosalind, will probably be there too. He mentions how they are going to use a gateway they set up, and he will wait for them there. She asks why, and he tells her because he's been rude to the Grandels, and he recalls beating Rosalind with a stick, and that is why he was exiled. He tells her he's going to apologize to Rosalind, because he was in the wrong. Ivelia says nobody in the Maiden will bow their heads, and he tells her when a mage's honor is pure, they won't, but when their honor has been lost, it is different. And that he hit Rosalind, and acted unlike a mage, so it is right to apologize. He wonders how he beat up Rosalind in the past, because before he possessed the body, it was trash. The Heavenly Eye activates and explains that Rosalind is extremely kind, and thinks violence is savage. And now he realizes why in the future, she is so aggressive, and has a different personality. Because she was upset at Larson, and she realized how difficult it is to be powerless, and she changed because of him. And because of her talent in martial arts, the family welcomed her change. Ivelia tells Larson whatever he does, she will support him. It cuts to the gateway, and we see Larson and everyone walking up the stairs, and Lydia is excited to try all the food at Cassin's, whereas Hampton is worried about going behind enemy lines, and he thinks that Larson has great plans, and is excited to be his shadow. Hera does not care. We see them pass through the gateways, seeing multiple different environments, and we learn they've gone through 22 gateways to arrive where they need to be. And the great